Hey YouTube, it's Raphael from XX Raphael Productions. Hopefully you're all doing well, and I also want to talk about Black Sabbath. So it's been one of my favorite bands for a while, and I'm going to specifically talk about 13, which is Black Sabbath's final album before they ended. So they actually released this album in 2013. I'm going to get the exact month, so let's go ahead and look at it. So yeah, June 10, 2013, this album was released. And in my opinion, this album has been one of the most underrated and underappreciated albums I've ever seen, okay? So the track list of each song is on screen right now, just for people who are not familiar with this album. And let's go ahead, I know that there's other albums like Paranoid, Master of Reality, Volume 4, there's Technical Ecstasy, you've got all those kind of stuff, but I think 13 deserves more credit as well, and especially this served as a great return form after the Forbidden album. Now, personally, I thought Forbidden was a good album, but I know a lot of people did not, so I can confidently say 13 was a superior album and was the best possible closer they could have got. Like, we had Dear Father, which is the last song of the album, and if you have the non-extended version, Dear Father should be the album closer, where it kind of finishes off with a thunderstorm, just like the first album did when Black Sabbath first released it in 1970s. So that was a great way to kind of make everything come full circle. You just knew that was the end of an era. I love that concept. That was a great one. Alright, so now on to the actual album itself. Now, why do I think it's underrated? Well, so a lot of people out there, what I've seen on Reddit when I'm browsing on the Black Sabbath discussion threads, a lot of the times this album gets criticism when it comes to how some of these songs kind of some of these songs sound like the old Black Sabbath songs just redone, like End of the Beginning kind of sounds like Black Sabbath in the first album, and then we had Loner sounding like NIB, God Is Dead sounds like Hole in the Sky, I guess you could say. So it kind of had like those kind of resemblances to the first albums, but I want to go ahead and kind of take a different approach and say that this is not a negative in my opinion, because now, personally, I like the way they call back to these albums, because like I said before, this is the closer album, so I appreciated all the references and callbacks to the previous albums. It's kind of like how you write a book and then you're referencing previous chapters before you continue, because I think really this problem really only lasted until around it lasted until Loner, because Age of Reason, Damaged Soul, Dear Father, Live Forever, they didn't really sound like any of the old Sabbath songs. I mostly heard those resemblances in the first 3 songs. Actually no, 4 songs. Zeitgeist was like Planet Caravan from the Paranoid album. But either way, those 4, the first half is really the only times that it kind of feels inspired from the old songs. So I don't think it's too much of a problem that it kind of detracts from the it detracts from the listening experience of 13. I still think it's a pretty solid album regardless, but I know that that's definitely one point that people might bring up a lot when it comes to this album. And let's go ahead and talk about the riffs, because oh man, this album is full of them. Tony Iommi, the guitar player, he clearly hasn't lost steam despite his old age. He still rocks pretty well in this. Let's see, we got Age of Reason, this outro, had God Is Dead as well, that was a good one. And I noticed, like I said before, the outro, if you're a fan of the Sabotage album, you would recognize the outro as Hole in the Sky, but it's kind of like changed enough that it's believable that it's a different song, it's not just a blatant rip-off, so that's one good thing about it. And End of the Beginning. Now, let me go ahead and tell you, since I've so far talked about why it's underrated, but let me give you my recommendations for this album as well. I think the best songs are Age of Reason, God Is Dead, Live Forever, and Damaged Soul. And I think honestly the only weak track in my opinion is probably End of the Beginning. It's not a bad song, okay? So don't get me wrong. None of the songs in this album are bad. All of it are actually enjoyable, but out of all the other 8 songs in this album, definitely End of the Beginning is probably the least that I enjoyed, because it's not necessarily, like I said before, it's not that it's because it's a rip of the first song back in the first album, but it's just like, I guess the riffs are not as catchy as the next 7 songs are, so that's one thing about it. And then probably Live Forever would be the next one I would put, but let me go ahead and rank the songs, okay? So let's go ahead and do that now. So I would say for the top, it is Age of Reason and God Is Dead. Those 2 are my top 2. I personally can't pick between those 2. Loner's next, and then I'd add Zeitgeist and Live Forever. And then definitely the last one would be End of the Beginning. That will be the last one. In that order. That's the way I rank these songs. So either way, it's still a very, very strong finish for Black Sabbath, and they definitely didn't soil their reputation. Because I mean, like, I remember I made a review a while back about Green Day's latest album, Father of All. Like, I'm also a fan of Green Day. Like, Green Day and Black Sabbath are my top 2 bands. I'm sure you know that right by now, because those are like the guitar videos I usually do on this channel. So Black Sabbath definitely ended on a high note, unlike Green Day, where I guess they have to release a better album, hopefully, because I did not like Father of All. I gave it a re-listen, but I still did not like it, alright? So let's leave it at that. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about all the callbacks. So, in regards to that, the 13th album by Black Sabbath, it really takes on an identity of its own around Age of Reason. So, well, like I said earlier, Zeitgeist is like Planet Caravan, right? Just like from Paranoid album. But if we're gonna go ahead and talk about the non-rip-off songs, well, I would say it really takes its own identity around Age of Reason. I don't remember now there are some albums of Sabbath I haven't heard yet, but so I'm mostly familiar with the Ozzy era and the Dio era, but I'm not really familiar with the other types of albums. So correct me if I'm wrong, but just comment that down below, okay? But I noticed on Age of Reason, that was a time that the album takes an identity of its own, alright? So, had an awesome outro, and that awesome riff. That riff was on loop the entire day while I was working my laptop, and wow, it's a good song. Just leave it at that. And then we go to Live Forever, where it's kind of, it does grow on you. Like the first time, it's probably not anything special, but it grows on you when you listen to it a lot of times, and then Damaged Soul, that was probably the most, aside, taking Zeitgeist out of the equation, Damaged Soul was one of the most bluey type of songs in this album, and I actually liked the whole, it wasn't not as heavy as the other songs, but it was a great change of pace when transitioning from Live Forever to Damaged Soul, then to Dear Father, the album closer. And let's go ahead and now talk about the album closer, Dear Father, because, oh wow, I enjoyed the lyrics are good. Like, this is one thing I like. The lyrics in this album, like the whole album, like Age of Reason's lyrics especially, are very relevant in today's climate, and Dear Fathers as well is quite deep, and I guess if you're into that kind of stuff, you know, like those kind of well-written lyrics, well, this album's definitely for you. So let's go ahead and talk about Dear Father, because this is the album closer, and I absolutely love the callback to the first album where it ends with the thunderstorm, whereas Sabbath initially started with the thunderstorm. So there you have it. It's kind of telling you it's the end of an era, and these legends are going out in a respectable manner. They ended with a good album, so they ended in a high note. That's a great way to make the band come full circle. And yes, I'm aware this album didn't have Bill Ward, the drummer, this time, but I'd say that Brad still does a good job on the drums, still powers through, and it's still an enjoyable listen. So, anyway. Alright, so it was a wild ride. This album is definitely worth a listen, and definitely comment down below what you think about this album as well. But personally, for me, I think that this album deserves more love. Like, I know that the classic Sabbath albums are Paranoid, Master of Reality, and Volume 4, and to an extent, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage. Like those, they usually refer to these as the first 6, including the first album they released, and I think 13 is good enough to be compared to those as well, alright? So, this is simply my opinion. I know that there are some Dio albums that can give this album some competition, but just go ahead and comment down below what you think. And this is Raphael out, and this is the album 13.